Hello, hello.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, depending on where you all are. Wanted to just welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Randy Likas, and I am the head of sales here at Nectar.ai here in North America. And I'm thrilled to welcome Nate Nasralla as my co-host for today's webinar. Hey, Nate, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, Randy, thanks for having me, man.
So let me see if I can just share here and share my screen, and we are ready to go. Nate, you're able to see my screen?
Yeah, we're live.
Perfect. Let's get started. All right. So as I mentioned, and I apologize, we're a few minutes late here. Had a technical difficulty, but we're all squared away. Thrilled to have Nate joining us. For those of you who don't know Nate, he is one of the renowned experts on selling with champions and champion enablement, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Nate, your book I think released late last year, which is when I had heard about it, and it was one of the best business books that I read last year. Truly was. And so I wanted to just kick off the webinar. Pranay, maybe you can fire a poll. Has anyone else read Nate's book before?
Right on. Looks like a couple folks.
All right, awesome. Well, for those that have read it, you're going to see at the very beginning here a little bit of a summary. For those that have not, I'm gonna give the punchline away in terms of what the sort of the key themes are here from the book. But that is just what it is. It's just a high level summary. I highly encourage everyone to go out and pick it up because it's truly going to change the way I think you sell, especially as you think about large complex deals. But the punchline here and sort of the key theme of the book is that sales reps really don't close deals. It's buyers that close deals. Okay. And we as reps, we need to do is we actually have to shape the internal conversations that are happening about us when we aren't there, when we're not either in the room, on the Zoom call, whatever it might be. Okay. And so what we want to try to do ultimately is help our champions or help the organizations that we're selling into move from where they are, right? A problem that hopefully during the sales process we've identified to a place of where they want to go, right? A payoff, a benefit of some kind that we hope that our service or solution is going to help them deliver. All right. And get them to a place where the cost of an action is greater than I actually have this written wrong, but the status quo, right? The is greater than the cost of your software. So they must move forward because what they're doing today is just not working. All right. And so that having that as the backdrop, I want to talk a little bit about why this is so important right now. And the reason why it's so important is that if you look at any one of the research companies, Gartner, Forrester, any one of the big thought leaders in the go-to-market space right now, we're all talking about buying committees and complexity of decisions and how, everything is harder these days with decisions moving up to the CFO. But, the research is telling us, at least from Gartner, is that 83% of all of these decisions are being made in some form of a buying committee. Yet 83% of the time, they're also being made when we're not there, right? Only 17% of these conversations that are happening, they're inviting us to be part of this. Okay. And the piece of research that I actually think is the most interesting, or the one that I really like sinking my teeth into, is the one that Challenger Research has done, where they looked at the size of the buying groups over time. And, in the past 6-7 years, it's more than doubled. And I think we can all even look at deals that we've had, which have been even more than 11 members. But as the number of buyers increase, as more people get involved, the chance of winning that deal go down. Now, why might that be? There's probably a number of different reasons, but I think some of the key things are, as we get more people as part of the buying committee who have different projects going on, different priorities going on, it's really, really hard to get consensus that this is a problem that's worth solving when you have people from maybe multiple business units or multiple departments. They all have competing priorities, right? They've all got certain things that they're trying to get done with their resources, and there's lots of burning fires in an organization, right? The question is, how do we identify the fires that are at risk of burning the house down? That's really what we're after to help close our deals. And so, with all of that as the backdrop, it's like, great, Randy, that sounds awesome, but how do we actually do it? And so that's where I want to, Nate, I want to invite you into the conversation to get some of your thoughts on this. I think that a lot of the book and a lot of what we find is that it's really about influence. We have to help influence our deals at a certain in certain ways. And so, earlier you had made a post around the power line, and I think a lot of times us as reps will sometimes we'll talk to our leaders, we'll talk to our managers, and our managers will say, well, you got to sell higher. Like you got to get access to power, and you got to get above the line, and you're calling too low. And like that's all fine and well, but it's really hard. Like every single call cannot, that we make to a VP is not going to get returned with a meeting. And so you call out this idea of being able to navigate the power line. And I'd love to just have you share a little bit more about the power line and why is it so hard to sort of establish the influence within our deals.
Yeah, so part of where I'll start my thoughts on that topic links back to something that you had said earlier around, especially as you're starting to do larger and more complex deals over time. The reality is that it's not just finding a high priority, high cost problem that's greater than the cost of your software. It's everything else that's wrapped up inside of a project. And so, Randy, I love the language that you're using around projects versus products, because the level of effort that's required to fully evaluate, implement, roll out, adopt, succeed, socialize that success with a new purchase inside of an organization is a whole lot of effort. And so what everybody is always thinking about is, do we really want to go through the change effort? And if we do, is the project going to succeed or is it going to fall flat? And one of the points in reality, so this power line that you're saying kind of being drawn in different ways, is oftentimes the people who are going to be closest to actually owning, rolling out that new platform, software, service, whatever it might be, they're somebody who the executive signing off is going to look to and say, like, really? Can you really see the team using this, owning this? Like, is this going to sit on the shelf? And so when you look at all the way down, who typically you might call a below the line buyer, and you might ignore their word, what they say, especially if they've been involved in a similar project in the past, can actually carry a whole lot of weight. And it's something that we see, which is actually pretty fun about having a go-to-market that's a blend of both PLG and sales-led on our side, is a lot of the influencers inside of like rolling out our software that I work with will be account executives, individual contributors who ultimately are already owning and running far ahead of their peers by doing things like enabling champions to go sell with written business cases. And so their sales leadership is looking at them and saying like, okay, are people actually going to use this? Are they going to shift and adopt new practices? What are you seeing? What difference has it made in your sales velocity? And they're a pretty integral piece to the buying committee, sometimes even the glue that keeps things moving, which again, and most times you might say, well, an individual contributor, an AE, how high influence can they truly be? And obviously it's going to depend a little bit on the nuances of your exact service or software. But the principle here is don't discount the people that are closest to the success of the project, because the people who are ultimately signing off and then focusing on something else are going to look to and depend on their people.
Yep, absolutely. And I think there's another piece to this that's really important about talking with the folks who maybe don't traditionally have the titles of the power line, but are certainly maybe influential. Is we as reps hopefully are doing our research into our accounts, and we're trying to understand key priorities. Maybe if we're calling on large enough accounts, like it's publicly traded companies where you can do so much, but like we can't get the internal baseball that's going on, right? The language that's being used and the project names that people are using. And like a lot of times, these meetings with people that are quote unquote not above the power line can give us a whole lot of insight that as we start calling on other people or start enabling the people that we are meeting with, that we can start using language that sounds like them. It doesn't sound like a vendor any longer. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So it's the fastest way to move yourself out of this mental category of vendor and put yourself more into the place of trusted party partner working together is to use the internal language of the buying team. And more specifically, what you were kind of referencing there is the idea of certain phrases or even code names that are entirely unique to that account that you're working on, meaning you couldn't reuse or repurpose that language in another account because it would just feel totally weird and foreign, like you're speaking another language, like you want to speak the language of that specific customer. And a kind of really good example of this, like one of my favorite resources to go check out is if you guys want to see what this looks like, go to techemails.com. And it's a whole site that's full of leaked internal documents, email threads, memos that corporate and enterprise executives have written. They were exposed in some type of either document leak or litigation. And I'll give you an example of this. On Friday, there was one where Mark Zuckerberg in 2016 wrote an email to his team saying, hey, we need to get some more insight and analytics on what Snapchat is doing. They're killing us right now. We're flying blind. We need to get some analytics. And so they create this internal project that's called Ghostbusters. And it's all about how do we get better competitive analytics to drive our positioning, roadmap, so on forward. And so just think about if you had, through your discovery by working with a champion, picked up on the language or the project name Ghostbusters and woven that into, let's say you do offer some type of competitive analytics like platform, amazing. Like, do you think that document or that email that you're about to send would be read or at least have a higher likelihood of getting read and shared and socialized internally if you use that language or if you took what was in your template deck, marketing deck, product deck, right? Obviously, it's the internal language. So techemails.com, if you guys want to see some real life examples of this, I think it's a great resource.
I love it. I actually have not heard of that, so I will check that out. But yes, 100% agree with you that the language and the vernacular and the project code names and how we incorporate that as part of our additional account penetration will give us so much more reward and response back if we can start doing that as opposed to the language that we use in our marketing decks.
Exactly.
So let me sort of change directions for a moment and give an example. I think that builds off of what we've talked about, and I like to tell this narrative, if you will, because I think we're all fairly familiar with it in one way or another, which is like us as salespeople, as reps, we try to generate meetings or interest or conversations with our prospects. Primarily two ways, right? We're either using our email and working out of our inbox, or we're following up on our emails and using the phone. And we may, depending on one of those two outcomes, right, through an email or we catch somebody on the phone, like we may talk with people and we may get a response back, and or maybe we can have a conversation and we might have a first meeting, right? And depending on how that goes, if it goes well, right, maybe additional people are invited, and we're now starting to collect the buying committee, right? Because the person that we first started talking with finds that there's something here, and so they want to schedule a meeting with other people. And we have this formation of the sales process, and where we know that we have to reach out to several different types of people, typically, right, depending on how complex our products are. But there's multiple people in which we want to reach out to. And over the course of the sales cycle, we're having multiple meetings, and maybe it starts with that one person, but we're missing everyone else. And maybe that second meeting, you've got somebody new. And maybe by that third meeting, we're starting to get more people. And as reps, we try to understand, like, who is it that's being invited to these meetings? What role is it that they play? And this is where we go back to some of those questions where, like, do they have the same excitement as maybe the person had in the first meeting, or are they working on the same projects and problems that they're trying to solve? Do they have access to funding, right? Or are they just somebody here to do the technical evaluation? But I think it's important that we also keep in mind that, like, they also have other jobs going on in their lives. They also have other things going on outside of the hour that we speak with them. And we have to try to understand what those hidden things are that they have that they might not be expressing on the meeting. But it's not just us figuring it out. This is the idea of helping enable our champions, helping our champions sort of develop that point of view or that narrative in which they can then go and help us think through these different people. And the challenge today, I think, is that a lot of times we have these meetings that are taking place, and a lot of it's just locked up inside of our own head, or it's locked up inside of our email, or it's locked up inside of our calendar. And we don't do a good job of extracting all of this, right? And it's just locked up. And so, what we're trying to do is get it to a point where, like, when we look at our opportunities, maybe in Salesforce, and we look at all of the different people who have come in and out of the deal over the past several months, like, where do we have momentum? And again, because it's locked up, it's hard to understand that. And there's tools out there, like there's a lot of sales tech that's going to help us understand, summarize the conversations that we've had with our clients. But where it gets really difficult right now is understanding the momentum. So, like, people were engaged early, but now they're falling off. People were participating in that second meeting, but now they're not. And I think part of the reason for that is that we're not aligning to the problems that they're trying to solve, right? And so, Nate, you talk a lot about in the book about helping develop a business case and helping develop a narrative. You think we call it a narrative, where it's moving away from the business case being like this event that we do at the end of the sales process, right? Where we sort of gotten everybody, we've had all these conversations, all these meetings, and now we got to come up with this deliverable of the business case, to moving to a new way of making the business case part of the overall sales process. All right. And you have several templates in Fluint, which is your company that you co-founded, which actually is all about enabling champions, but you've got different ways. And one of the things that I found most useful and that I use every day now as part of my deals is the one-page business case. Okay. A one-page business case is ultimately what we're trying to do is create this narrative with the client based on the discussions that we've had around challenges, what they've tried, why it's not working, metrics they're trying to achieve, and use this as sort of the document in which we collaborate together to try to get alignment from the buying committee, right? It's not about white papers. It's not about ebooks and infographics and things at the marketing team. It's much different than that. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what's the how do you move from a way in which the business case is something we deal with later on, and operationalize that to something we do sort of at the beginning of the sales process and work with our champions throughout the course of the deal?
Yeah. So one of the things that you were pointing out in the reframe from a business case being an activity at a single point in the process, if it's done at all, because a lot of deals simply don't have any type of business case. It's a template deck, which is a huge miss, because when you see the business case in the reframe as the process, the sales process fundamentally, you begin to realize, like, the way that you get a champion in place in the first point is by co-creating that business case together. It's the process together of developing the message to build up a sense of confidence and ownership, because all of us, like, when we are involved in creating something, we're going to take a larger stake we're going to become far more committed inside of whatever that project might be. And so when you start this early stage during your discovery, one, you're setting up more of a collaborative way of doing this together to actually build and test for, do I have a champion? And you're going to begin to understand and identify, do I have things like that internal language? Am I tapped into a specific project or priority internally? Where there are gaps, for example, I have no numbers or dates anywhere from inside of the buying team, inside of this message. and you'll begin to uncover what don't you yet know about the deal that then you can fill in together, because ultimately the place where this is going to be used. So again, if you're doing this with the customer versus pitching something at them, you're using their language, their dates, their data, and it's built around a priority, which is simply something they're already sold on. Then you're tapping into the core use case, which is all of what you were showing is so much of the sales process is actually happening behind the scenes, and it's led by the champion, the buyer, selling their own team. So when you shift towards this, that's how you're increasing the amount of overlap and therefore influence that you can build during those internal conversations, because that's what this is for. It's not for sales meetings. And most people think, okay, the business case is a financial model that I present during my sales meeting. And that's a huge miss, because you're not shaping all of the closed door conversations where a decision is actually going to be made. So that's where, in what you're showing here, it's like pick any activity that you're ultimately running over the cycle or the course of a deal. It's going to roll up into and then be guided by that process of creating the business case over time.
So this is sort of a revolutionary way to work with your clients, right? Because we typically have not been trained that we should be doing this, and it's something that we want to introduce early on as a way to do it. How do you do it? Like how do you sort of introduce it into the process, and what happens if you get somebody who's like, it seems like kind of some work. I'm not there yet, right? Or what recommendations might you give around that?
Yeah. So the first thing is the point, like it's never too early, but it's often far too late to start this up. So what you want to do is think about right after your first discovery conversation, when you're setting up some of the next steps, let's say like Randy, you and I, had a great conversation. I'm sensing that you're excited, but you're going to go and talk to Abhi, and you need to get Abhi on board. And so what I might say is, hey, Randy, you mentioned that for you, you're trying to solve for 1, 2, and 3, but Abhi's focused on 4, 5, and 6. If I write up a short recap tying those points together, that would make it easy for you to invite Abhi into the next conversation. Would you be open to letting me know if I've missed anything? So I write this up. Are you down to give me a comment or two of just some kind of quick feedback to let me know if I'm on the right track? And while we're talking, I'm going to set up the process. I'm going to get your commitment or buy-in. And then when we wrap, that's when I'm going to share that afterward. And we're going to start so that ideally when Abhi comes in, takes a look at the message, there's some notes from Randy already in there. And so it changes the framing or the posture to, oh, okay, it looks like somebody on my team is already involved in this. If you're getting, now to your other question, you're getting some friction, you're getting some pushback of like, nah, right? You just don't get any interest, agreement. That's when you can start to press in a little bit and say, by the way, Randy, like if this feels more like a Q3 or Q4 thing, and you think it would be better to catch up then, and maybe just kind of put this to the side for the moment because it's interesting, but not top of the stack, totally cool. Feel free to let me know. And if I try to just kind of push it out down the line, and you're like, that sounds great. Now I know where things stand in your mind, and we're on the same page.
Now, you Nate, let's play this out for a second. Let's say I do give you that kind of friction a little bit, and I say, I'm not quite there yet. What does that tell you as a seller? Does that tell you maybe I'm not talking to the right people yet? I've got some more stones I gotta turn over. Does it tell you like I haven't identified the big enough problem yet? Like does that resistance tell me something or point something back to me that like I've got more work to do?
Right. It can be. It can be that you're talking to the wrong or not the right stakeholder. But part of it will just kind of depend on if you map out all of the different roles inside of your typical deal. And you will typically know like who is more in the language of Challenger, who's going to be more the mobilizer, somebody who is pushing something forward from nothing, and they're going to go create a project where none exists. Other people are going to be more stakeholders. They may be involved in implementing and rolling it out. So for example, RevOps in my deals, they never really initiate a deal. They'll be involved over time as the cycle progresses, but they're never a mobilizer. They're more on the implementation, go live, later stage cycle. Now, in Nektar's world, a little different. Some of the main owners are going to be more RevOps people. And so you know the profile of who is typically going to initiate a deal. So if you're not talking to them, then that's a case where it's like, okay, I need to switch the profile of who I'm talking to. If you are talking to the typical profile of somebody and you're getting that like, hey, I'm not into it, then that's something to kind of, one, clue into, but two, find and surface as early as possible inside of the deal.
Yeah. And I think the other thing I would comment is like even if you get that kind of maybe resistance and look, or someone that doesn't want to participate with you in on this, like the fact that you've had a conversation with them in the past and got a little bit of that inside knowledge that you can then start like framing a draft of this that maybe you're not ready to share it, but like you use some of that as you're reaching out and trying to go wider in the account or higher in the account, right? And so like I think you could still sometimes use this as a good framework internally for yourself to start building a point of view, even if whoever you're speaking with at the moment isn't ready to engage with you, because at some point you are going to get that, and you're going to keep building off of the initial sort of insights that you developed.
Right. That's right. Yes, that's exactly right.
Right. Okay, let's talk about problem statements for a moment, and then I'd like to open it up to the audience. So, problem statements. If you think about the very, very top of the where the document here, it's maybe after your headline. We're talking about problem statements, and I used to work at Outreach. I used to work for Mark Casaglo, who's a friend of mine and who is just an absolute wonderful salesperson and sales leader and teacher. And he taught me something which I think he actually learned from you, which was this idea of a formula. Okay, a formula for you to think about. And it's in the book as well on how to develop a problem statement. And this is the formula that I like best, which is, despite trying X, whatever X might be, like a failed solution, we still can't do Y, which is the desired outcome, as measured by whatever metric they have. And it's costing us the target metric, right? So you can apply this to pretty much any one of your deals. I mean, I'm sure we've got a bunch of different products that people sell, but let's just do it for like Clary. Like despite trying to implement a better forecasting solution, right? We still can't get a predictable forecast as measured by the amount of deals that are pushing, right, each quarter, right, which is costing us X amount of revenue, which is costing us $10 million in revenue, right? It's very easy to start putting these things together when you think about this in a formula or a framework like this. And where this has been helpful for me is it also helps me understand where I lack discovery, if you will. If I can't put this together, I might not have asked the right questions yet. And so if I get on my next meeting or I do a touch base with my champion, I now know where I need to go discover to help create sort of the basis of the problem statement, because I think everything stems from the problem statement. And so we'd love to just get your thoughts. What am I spot on? Would you add anything? What are your thoughts around the problem statements?
Yeah. So a couple of things that I would add on. One, you are spot on. Like, this is one of the best ways to pressure test the quality of your discovery is if you try to create a written problem statement across, let's call it 3 accounts. Look to see how similar those problem statements end up sounding, and then take some of those and show it to a colleague, to your manager, and say, hey, don't include the account name. Hey, which account do you think this is? If they can't specifically name an account based on just the problem statement alone, because it's so identifiable and specific to them, then you know that you can go a little bit deeper working with the champion. Now, one other piece that you could kind of layer on top of this is you could use the phrase which means. So write this out and then say costing us target metric, which means, right? And then you go on further and you say, this is the cost, but what's the true consequence or other way that this is showing up inside of the company? So for example, So let's continue with your example on clarity and forecasting, right? So let's say it's costing us variance or accuracy inside of our end of quarter forecast, and deals are slipping. So what does that actually mean? Well, that means what we just handed to prospective investors in our next capital raise, calling our number for the end of quarter, totally went out the window, and it's costing us credibility. When we say the numbers far out in the future that we're going to hit, we're actually going to hit. We've now lost confidence, and those investors are now discounting when they're looking at our future numbers, which, and then you can play it out again. Well, what does that mean? Why is that not good news? Well, that's now showing up in our valuation because they're running their net present value, discounting it back to the future. And they're saying, I think the enterprise value here is actually a little lower. I don't think that, 20 million future number, it's probably going to be more like 17 based on what I'm seeing near term. Right.
Yep.
So you can layer this out and play this out to a couple different degrees.
Yeah. And again, I think the key takeaway here as well is like, you don't have to have this like 100% buttoned up. Like you could, if you've got 60, 70% of this built out, you could take this to the champion and say like, help me understand what this means to you guys. Right. If this doesn't happen, like, what does that mean? And they might not know the answer, but they can maybe go take it to people that do know the answers. But it's this idea around helping frame the narrative with your champions that to go find out answers to questions, because what we're getting at here is that big problem, right? We're getting to that big fire that needs to be put out.
Totally. Yeah, that's exactly right. And what I would say is think about those gaps or those spaces as well as that spaces that you can invite your champion into to create together. If you already believe that you have a perfect business case, you've left no room to work and to collaborate together. And that's not the point. You want to do this with them. So it's more about the process together, not the perfection. Your goal isn't to get to a perfect business case on your own.
Yeah. Is there such a thing, Nate?
Well, I would, you could potentially make an argument as a perfect business case is the one that gets the deal done. But kind of an interesting data point is we've created a scorecard or a rubric, an objective standard by which you can measure and say, is this a good business case or is it not a good business case? And when we've worked with teams, we studied a little over 1,000 different deals. What we found is that the average score, or kind of the dividing line for where we saw win rates jump from 12% up to 64%, was 72%, meaning you need to score a C- in your business case when built with the customer in order to have a, quote, winning business case, which really isn't all that high of a standard, meaning you can miss the mark of perfection by a pretty wide margin and still get a deal done. So I guess it depends on, are you going by a scorecard or are you going by closed won revenue? If closed won revenue, you need a 72 out of 100 on the scale.
Yeah. You've also shared some things. I don't know if it was other webinars or I've heard you speak about this, and I think it would be, I think it speaks to like how well a business case is written is when a senior executive looks at this and says, did we write who from our company wrote this? Right? Like, this is really good. They're taking this and thinking that's an insider wrote it. And in some cases, an insider did right? You're doing this collaboratively with them. But I think that's the ultimate compliment on how well it is when an executive goes, this sounds like it came from somebody that already works here.
Right. Yes, that's exactly it. That's the whole idea is you're back to the use case. Like, the use case is not for you in your sales meeting. It's for your champion to guide and script their message to sell to their own team during an internal meeting. And so that's the highest compliment that you can be paid, is like somebody passes it off as their own work and everybody else sees it as trustworthy, reliable, because it was built internally. So yes, that's maybe we'll say it that way. That's one of the markers or indicators of a perfect business case.
Yep. One of the questions, and before we go over to the audience, what place does some of the other collateral that has been put together have in side by side with what we're doing here on sort of the collaborative business case? So case studies, ebooks, like everything else that's kind of put together. How do we use this in combination with some of those other things? Or, I think I don't want to leave the question, so I'll leave it there.
Yeah. So I'm picking up where you're going. So the idea is once you create that internal unique business case with the customer's language, then think of that as almost like a Wikipedia page where you have context and you can link out to other supporting resources. So let's say under your outcomes section, where you're talking about the impact against those metrics that we were talking about quantifying with the problem, you could link a case study and say, hey, here's an example of somebody inside of our peer set even, and this is what they achieved over this period of time.
Yep.
But that's in the context of an exec's own team already used their own numbers and did this with you. And so that case study is going to be received and seen totally differently. So think of it like the Wikipedia page. You can link out to other, vendor branded, vendor created assets as support.
Yep. Great. Well, let's turn it over for questions. Let's take a look at some of the audience questions and see what we've got going.
Great. Sounds great.
Pranay, do you want to take the lead here, or let's take a look through? I'm looking at here. We'll take this one from Emily. Can or should multiple problem statements based on personas or various teams? Do you pick the biggest impacting metric and then use the consequences to address multiple risks, costs, etc.?
Mm-hmm. So, Emily, yes, there can be multiple problem statements. My suggestion is first to think about who is ultimately the person who can say yes and green light the deal. And can you create a guiding framing of the problem based on what they're going to be thinking about? From there, you can create different versions to talk about the impact on a specific persona or functional role to say, and this is how it shows up in RevOps, and this is how it shows up in finance, and here's how that shows up in IT. Now, the other way to kind of think about it is oftentimes, especially as it relates to finding a specific metric or the impact against a metric, if you haven't seen it before, take a look at the image of what's called a driver tree. A driver tree is a way to think about one outcome metric as a series of inputs. What downstream metrics ultimately drive or roll up into that one outcome. And this is a great way to think about a multi-layered problem statement where you can find that chain of different metrics, and then you can drop little problem statements alongside of it, ultimately starting with the context of like, hey, what is the main thing that we're trying to solve here? That guiding framing, and then you can kind of build it out from there. So Emily, great question, by the way. And that's how I would think about that one.
What about revenue operations? So what role does your internal RevOps team have in helping reps do champion enablement and doing something similar to what we're talking about today?
Yeah, so the way that I would think about it is that for RevOps, you want to set up and enable some of the data capture. For example, one of the richest sources of the discovery and the language are conversations, call transcripts that you can take and use. And RevOps, like if none of that exists, if none of that data is being captured and can be referenced or drawn on during the sales cycle, hey, there's a great project to go own and run with. So as it relates to operationalizing some of this away from just a manual process, it's often going to have RevOps involvement.
Any other questions from the audience? Well, Nate, I want to wrap up and talk a little bit about Fluint, which is the company that you co-founded, which is I started using probably 4 to 5 months ago, which is how we can actually operationalize a lot of this one-page business case. And it's more than that. There's all kinds of templates in there. And this isn't a vendor presentation, but I just think it's such a powerful tool to help implement a lot of the things that we talked about. Where might someone go to learn more about Fluint and the capabilities?
Yeah, best place, and I'll chat it out, is just the site where you can also read and see some of the graphics that Randy was sharing on the blog there. So Fluint.io, you can see exactly how the product works to generate business cases in your buyer's language, some of the different resources on the process. Like if you want to just try this, by the way, DIY style, you can take the full one-page business case framework that Randy was mentioning, and you can give that a shot just on your own in kind of a simple Google Doc style, which I'll share with you guys here as well. And it's a great way to look at both the process, and if you decide, hey, we need business cases to enable our champions to sell, how might we create them? Then you can kind of take a look at the product to see if it makes sense to operationalize.
Yeah, that's the way I started. I started just using it in the Google Doc by myself, and then worked out really well. But then there was so much more in Fluint itself, which once I got in there, I got to start using it. So
I love it.
All right. Well, with that, I just want to say thank you for everyone for joining us today. And I want to, Nate, thank you very much for your time and your insights. It was incredibly valuable, and look forward to connecting again soon.
Yeah, likewise, Randy. Thanks so much for the invite. Appreciate it.
I have a good one.
All right, y'all.